Hello, this is Phantom Electric Ghost. You are on the air, being recorded.
Hey, how are you?
And we have Kaede Lynn.
Yes, that's good enough. Sounding to me.
So you're an Afro-indigenous spoken word artist, and you're from Toronto, Canada, right?
Yes, yes.
And you've been on Instagram, and I've looked at a lot of your postings. I have
Mm,
like two of your poems that I pulled
mm.
um, for when I published the episode. Um, that I will actually push it on one of my blogger pages. Um, So I didn't know if you wanted to talk. We'll talk about a little bit later. I don't know if you want to recite any of your material during the podcast. If you want to, you can.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in what poems that you pulled, which ones that you went for.
I pulled one that started um, with this statement that it's on your Instagram. So it said, "Writing
Mm.
gives me such pleasure. I love to ink
Oh,
how the
okay.
ink leads to scripture." And
Mm.
then the other one that I pulled was, "I have an acute sense that my time is
Mm.
short and
Yeah.
I'm on borrowed time." So I have that in the images with those, and I'm going to be
Mm.
pushing that with when I publish. But we could talk about those two particular poems, or you could talk about anything you want regarding your poetry. But I sent you a list of questions, so we can get into that if you want to.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
So, when did you start writing poetry? At what age did you get interested in poetry?
I started writing poetry probably when I was about 16. I was terribly horrible in school. I hated school, but I really took to English class because I loved studying books. And when we got to the poetry section of an English class, um, I really liked the poetry, but I never did my homework at all, ever. So, this guidance counselor that was working with me, because I was a troublemaker, she knew that I wrote my own poetry, so she actually talked to the teacher and asked him if I could submit some of my own personal poetry that would go towards my grade. Because I was unwilling to participate in class, but I had a skill for writing my own. So that's how I got through that English class. But through that experience, I realized that I had a knack for writing quite deeply emotional and often dark things at a very young age. I was able to articulate those emotions.
Were there any particular poets that when you were in the English class that appealed to you, that got you interested in when you were taking the courses? Were there certain like a certain era of poetry that you were into more than another?
Yes, Edgar Allan Poe is my one of my heroes.
Oh, so you like that poet. Um, so I had actually, part of my music career is I started, writing poems, and I was kind of drawn
Mm.
to the Victorian period, and William Blake and Tennyson were like the ones that I kind of keyed in on, and then also Langston Hughes, and some of the Harlem Renaissance poets. But I initially, before I became a musician, I was doing poetry, and then I decided to take the poems and convert them into songs, which is a whole
Mm.
different thing. But I
Mm.
was I loved like Blake and his like songs of innocence and experience, and they were kind of very simple structures, like Tiger, Tiger, how fearful thy symmetry. But they really kind of spoke to me
Yeah.
more than some of the verbose poetry that you could get into
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
Wordsworth and Tennyson. I like the fact that he could be really brief, but kind of like very emotive in his brief,
Mm.
like use of verbiage.
Yeah.
And I thought that kind of related to songs.
There is some relation between poetry and lyric writing. But I find with the lyrics, you of course have to focus a little bit more on rhyming.
Yeah, it kind of goes with the
Um,
measure of the music. The kind of beat forces you to rhyme.
yeah, which is fun to do. It's also a challenge to do. I have written poems that were all rhyme. But I moved away from that because it was restricting my ability in the range of words I could play with and use and
Yeah, I think when you
explore.
get more advanced in poetry, you don't have to be on that rhyme type
Yeah,
of
I
meter. You
agree.
can go with other types of structures that are more like, I always like Dylan because sometimes Dylan
Yeah,
rhymes, but sometimes he tells stories,
I
and
love that.
and he's able to do it. In some places near the melody, he'll rhyme it, but in other places he'll have this like this kind of great poetry that he's written. He's referencing all these great literary giants that he kind of built off of, and he
Hmm.
uses all this imagery, but they're always stories, But they're more it's more like a novel, like a sound
Yeah,
novel. But
yeah,
yeah, I understand what you're saying. Because if you get stuck into that like rhyme structure, you can't do it. And there's some places I like to do kind of just abstract, kind of like
yeah.
Lou Reed type, Andy Warhol, Lou Reed experimentation back in the '60s, like with the Velvets. They would do a lot of stuff that was just kind of spoken word, abstract, and maybe just kind of just stream of consciousness is something I really like.
Mm,
To record with this, like, don't have a set idea, just kind of go with the mood.
yeah,
But
yeah. I mean, that's mostly how I operate when it comes to writing is I don't put a lot of thought in writing. Like these ideas just kind of come to me and I will start to scribble them down no matter where I am. I carry a notebook wherever I go. And it kind of comes to me in a huge flash. But each poem, I think in total, I spend it at minimum like 2 hours. Some poems have taken me like 5 hours to for it to fully come into fruition.
but you don't like to keep on going back at it like an epic poem like the Odyssey or something. You kind of let it come and then you let it
Yeah,
go, like a painter.
yeah,
Like if you have like this painting idea, you can either stay on it and layer it for months, or you can say,
hmm,
well, I'm going to do it in that 3 hour session.
yeah, and get it out. And but if some poems they'll come to me halfway, and if there's a blockage that won't allow me to finish it, I just walk away and let it return, let the incessant ghost return and see if it will communicate with me and allow me to write down what it's trying to say.
That's
I mean, that's kind of what inspiration feels like to me. It's like this thing that, and all of these ideas will like pop in my head and I'll latch onto one. It expresses itself through a poem. I'll read it back. I have no freaking idea where it came from.
Do you feel like
And
it's coming? Some people feel like there's like a muse, like a lot of poets used to feel like they were tapping into this like universal muse. Like even musicians feel like Hendrix used to talk about, like, I'm just kind of tapping into the universe, right? So even the guy who invented one of the famous synthesizers, Moog, in all the manuals, when you get a Moog, it says like, I kind of built this invention because I think I'm pulling things out of the universe. So here he
yeah,
was an engineer that felt like when he built it, the universe was kind of dictating how he did it. He didn't kind of have exactly the plan. It kind of just fell together.
yeah, it falls together. And if if you don't catch it when it comes, it will come back and it will just haunt you incessantly until it's almost as if there's something beyond you that has kind of picked you as its medium to express itself,
Yeah.
and it will get these urges to have a message, and that's kind of what it feels like when the ideas come. It feels urgent to me, and so I write it down as quickly as I can, and I have to just succumb to it.
So you like to put it on a actual physical paper, because there's some
Yeah,
people today that voice record it, or they do it with a computer, but you like to do it kind of old school, like pen to a diary to a notepad, right?
yes,
You feel more that it's more, it feels more real. It's kind of like when
it
musicians,
is.
I put down on tape versus
Mm,
putting down on digital stuff, because I feel like if you put it down on an analog system that's not digital, you capture. I
mm,
use a lot of old type of synths, organs and 1960s, 1970s stuff, which is not what people do today. They just go on a laptop. But
Mm.
I kind of feel like I have to have instruments that have like organic feel.
Yeah, you do.
If you use like these electronic synthesizers from the 70s and 60s, they have character. They kind of
Yes.
have a life of their own. And when you
Yes.
turn them on, you kind of feel the universe talking to you
Yes.
from your Hammond or your Moog or your
Yes.
Wurlitzer. It kind of, you tap into it. So I can get what you're saying because I feel that
Yes.
when I'm playing my Moog.
Yeah, for me it's like when the words are coming to me, I hear the voice. It's a very like powerful voice, and it's critical for me. The whole aspect of the energy coming through and flowing down your arm into the pen, through the ink, onto the paper, it's such a part of the process. Like when I post it on Instagram, that is like the end of it. Like I've been here like wallowing in like the
Yeah, you had it on the page and now you put it into cyberspace and now the whole world can get it. It's kind of like musicians when we had it on tape and then we push it out so you can hear it. You know, I think it's that same feeling. I think it's like, I think actors get that feeling when they're on stage doing like a play, and you know, a really good actor kind of has that improvisational skill to kind of
hmm
become the character, you know, like a method
Yep.
actor, you know.
Yep.
I
And the
think,
thing too is like when I write, like I recently wrote more of a story slash poetry called The Legend of Circe, which is based on the Greek goddess.
oh cool.
And I was a little apprehensive about that one because it's a little more racier than I usually would do. And and of course, like some of my favorite authors is I love Edgar Allan Poe, I love James Joyce. I really don't. I like short.
You still there? Oh, what happened? You kind of dropped off. Are you still there?
Yeah, am I here?
Yeah, you're back. You dropped
Sorry
for a
about
second.
that.
You're
Yeah,
talking about
so
James Joyce. I think I heard the last thing I heard you were talking about James Joyce. And,
yeah, so I was saying that I really like short story authors who don't rely on dialogue to tell their stories. Like they're very strong descriptive writers that can really bring the reader in and experience the environment as if they were there.
or like narration, and you know,
Yes.
without having. There's some writers are really into dialogue, and yet
Yeah.
some of them are more narrative writers. I do enjoy the narrative type.
So I was so when I write, I feel like the reason why because I have to question like why is it that people seem quite drawn to my writing? And I thought it's because I was there, you know. It's when I write, I don't if I'm writing something sad, I'm really writing that with tears streaming down my cheeks. Like I write when I'm in the throes of something very intense.
Mm.
And so I think it just kind of, I'm a believer when you authentically pour your heart and your soul into whatever it is that you're doing, people will feel that. They will feel it.
Definitely,
Because I read other poetry, there's a lot of other people on Instagram, and I read a lot of other people's work, and some of it, it's like, it's good, but there's something flat about it.
I think you
And
gotta be willing to show your soul. You know, I think like
you
even
do.
with a musician, like if you are not fully honest with the audience, they'll kind of feel it. Like if you're not really given like everything, you know,
hmm
like when you get, if you're a musician, you kind of get it like a jazz guy. Like I'm into like free jazz fusion, and you have to kind of really feel it, and you know when
Yeah.
somebody you play with is not feeling it, because if you're feeling it, you just don't even have to talk. Like if you're with a group of musicians and you guys are all in tune, you can just kind of you're just so into it that you're kind of like the muse is talking to you, the universe is talking to you. You kind of get in a trance,
Oh,
and
I
it's
know
just,
where I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah. If you're kind of like a faker, you're
Yeah,
asking like, what chord chart is that? What key is that? Why do you have to ask that? You know,
exactly.
because like if you feel it, you already know it. You know,
Yeah, I remember a line came to me recently. If I think about what does an artist do? First of all, I think it's the artist's divine duty to express themselves to the world. Um, but one thing that I like to think about is the artist's job, for me anyways, is to kind of bleed to death in front of your audience. Which is kind of dark, but that's how I express myself. But it's like, for me anyways, like I want people to see and feel the rawness of my emotion, because I want people to know that you're fucking human. And this is what humans do. We feel dark stuff, we feel light stuff, and all of it is legitimate and honest, and we shouldn't be repressing anything we feel. And so part of me believes that if I just kind of bleed myself dry and just show everybody that raw humanity in me, that maybe there's somebody out there that really needs to
I think
know that it's,
yeah, I think that style, of writing, you get people, in my opinion, like growing up, like I listen to Kurt Cobain, you listen to like Neil Young, they used to be really threadbare, you're
yeah.
showing like everything. Like Neil Young on Tonight's the Night, back in the 70s, that was considered very personal, raw work. And he's talking about the deaths of some of his bandmates from heroin overdoses. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the songs are him like almost sounds like he's gonna cry. It sounds like
Probably.
he's like the keys are kind of not solid. He's kind of very raw.
Yeah.
It's not as polished as his Nashville stuff, and it's like it's on purpose to be that raw. And a lot of
Yeah.
like punk people, a lot of punk players or people got into post punk or things that were more raw, like grunge. Kind
Mm-hmm.
of looked at Neil and saying, "Wow, he really showed the way of how you could be a famous guy like that." Guy Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Can do beautiful voices, but could actually get very raw
Mm-hmm.
and raucous and actually reveal something that's the dark side of music. I mean, talking about drug overdose, he's not talking
Mm-hmm.
about like, oh, I love this girl, I'm in
Mm-hmm.
love with this. He's talking about people who are dying, you know.
Yeah.
And I totally get that. I've always kind of been drawn, kind of like Lou Reed talking about like waiting for the man. He's talking about like Venus and Furs. He's talking about like S&M and all this crazy stuff in the Velvets. And people say, what is that? Why are you drawn to that? Well, because like you don't want to just hear pop songs all day. Sometimes you want to hear people kind of pushing it. So I get it. I get what you're saying.
I feel like he was probably likely it was legit, like he had repressed and grief, and it was self-healing. And
Yeah.
as an artist, it's like there's nothing better than spilling your guts for an audience, honestly.
Do you feel it's cathartic? Do you feel like
Oh
doing your
yeah.
art is cathartic? Like to me, a lot of musicians I talk to, we do what we do because it is like we're talking to our therapist, and
Yes.
and even if it doesn't make money, we still do it because we'll go play anywhere. A lot of musicians I know, if they're really into music, they don't care about the money. They'll just work with anybody, go play anywhere
Yep.
because it's the feeling that
Well,
they get.
it's keeping me alive, to be honest.
Yeah.
To be honest, like I have dealt with darker, like I have dealt with like suicidal issues. I have struggled with that throughout my life, and I can honestly say there's been at least two times when poetry has saved my life. And so I am a believer that art is it is like the authentic healer for the human spirit.
Yeah, I feel sorry for people who don't have that creative capability to kind of get them out
Mm-hmm.
of that place because I think sometimes some people hit the wall and they don't know how to get out of it. And a lot of the creative people I deal with, they've told me the same thing you just said. I've been a musician for like 30 years, and I've run into guys who have hit that wall and going and playing the blues or playing jazz or playing whatever they play. It got them out. It kept them from going
Yep.
there because that's one thing where the light was, where they
Mm-hmm.
felt they could go to a place in New Orleans, get into a small club, play, and it made them feel better. It made them actually exercise their demons.
Yep.
And that's kind of what it's all about to me.
It was interesting earlier when you were saying about, you know, it's a lot of artists experience as kind of like tapping into like the collective unconscious.
Yeah,
And I did write a poem where I was legit like felt like the universe was talking through me. It was actually one of the most insane moments of my little short existence so far. But I later come to recognize it is not so much as like a collective unconscious, but it's almost as if I'm tapping into like a higher version of myself.
yeah. I think sometimes it is like sometimes you're actually tapping into your subconscious, or you're everybody has like their selves. If you get into different ideas, like the id and the ego and the super ego, and then
Mm-hmm.
you could then these things that I'm a part, Cherokee, Blackfoot, and there's ideas that you could tap into, like your spirit animal. You could
Yes.
tap into this other thing that is part of you, but it's part of the universe too. And when you kind of are free, like when you become free and you don't let yourself like put walls on yourself, then you can tap into that.
Yes, you're
And I
right.
think,
It's part of
yeah,
you and it's a part of the universe as well.
yeah, I
I
think
agree.
all these great musicians actually can tap into that. And I think all creative people, actually actors and people like yourself, poets, actually tap into that.
Yeah.
It's part of the whole process. Is I think sometimes I get frustrated when I see musicians that are more mechanical or
Yeah.
more robotic in their structure. And I'm like, where are you tapping to? Well, I'm kind of, they're just stuck on the grid, or they're stuck on the kind of
Yeah.
like very anal retentive type of things, and they're not. It's like
Yeah.
where's your real passion coming from?
Well, here's the
You know?
thing too. I've been kind of merging into like short film, and the thing is, the little films that I make, like the latest film that I did, is quite radical because it breaks all the rules and basically is like a middle finger to all of the technical rules and that are out there for filmmaking, and maybe even what's acceptable to show in filmmaking. But in studying films, I noticed that there's a lot, and this is probably the same with musicians, there's a lot of them that technically they've got it made, right? Like they know the rules, they know how to play, they know how to, like in film, they know how to edit, they know when to do the climax and arc and all this stuff. But like ultimately, the story falls kind of mundane and dry. It's like technically it's awesome. Sounds great, it looks great, but there's no substance to the story. There's something that
Yeah.
spirit is not there.
But I think that's why I was always drawn to, like, Hitchcock. I was drawn to like the Third Man, some of these great classic films, like if you go Citizen Kane, Orson Welles,
Yeah,
just because of
definitely.
what he could do. If you look at
Yeah.
Orson Welles films, and there's a lot of passion in the way he did it,
Hmm.
and it's like it's super artistic,
Yep.
in that he's trying, whether or not he was trying to make money wasn't the really thing. He's trying to express art at a high level.
Yep.
And anytime you see somebody who's trying to express art at a high level, initially what happens is people say, well, you're not supposed to do that. Like Hendrix, they told me, you're not supposed to use feedback. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do that. I mean, he ended up going in the studio most of the time and kicking the recording engineer out, but because they weren't capturing his sound, because he was doing sound that was like, well, that's not actually right. You're making all these sounds that, like, all the recording engineers said, what we're going beyond the levels. It's not what we're supposed to do. And he's, he's the king of that. And
Mm.
you when you're in that zone where you're like a Coltrane or a Miles Davis or a Sun Ra, you're a musician and you're pushing the envelope, you get all this resistance, because, like, you're not doing what was done before, and people don't know how to handle it. But I think that's a good place to be. I think it's always good to be pushing it.
It's a very for me, when I feel if there are kind of restrictions or laws being placed on my art, it actually feels quite oppressive to me, and it's not a good feeling. Definitely not a good feeling. Like I feel almost like I go into like flight or flight mode when I feel like something is kind of pressing down on my self-expression.
Yeah, I think
So
there's a lot of places today where, people, you think we'd be more free because of all these elements of social media, but there's still a lot of like barriers and a lot of walls that people put up, or a lot of rules that
yeah,
people, even like in a type of music like EDM. EDM has a structure, it has a drop, right? And
yeah.
people are like, well, where's the drop? Well, like, well, maybe this isn't exactly EDM. Maybe this is sliding into trance or psytrance or something else, or maybe I'm throwing elements of jazz in it so it doesn't have it. And they're like, oh, we can't put that in this genre.
Man, I get that drop though. Like people are just addicted to that drop. I
Yeah,
get the
yeah.
drop. I
Yeah,
know.
so if you're trying to like branch out, it was like, where is it? It's like a disco. If you don't have that disco beat, it's not disco, you know. So it's like within genres, you have like rules, and if somebody
Yeah.
within a genre trying to push the rule, then you get resistance.
Uh, yeah, and the thing too is when I first, especially when I branched off with the first little short film I did, it was, which is just it's just me doing poetry read. So basically I just turned my poetry in for the dialogue. So it's kind of like a trippy dreamscape because it's like nobody's talking real language. It's just like poetry language. But the thing is when you do things that are very radical or pushing the limits, is it does limit your audience because not everyone's going to be interested in things that they experience as strange. But I realized, like, no, that's actually a great thing because it means that the people who are actually experiencing your art really enjoy it. Because there's a lot of people who just follow art for the sake of following art, but they don't actually, I think maybe it's cool for them to do it. Uh,
It's good to be. I don't know. I've always been kind of an independent musician, where
yeah,
my audience is like, the way my audience is running with my music is like under 100,000, hitting the
yeah.
100,000, and in that zone, you're like labels are like you can only get into small labels, and
Mm,
I've dealt with smaller labels that can handle that. But you get the bigger labels, they're like, well, you got to be able to reach 500 to like 2 million to 3 million. So like you purposely, if you stay within like what you believe in,
yeah,
you limit your audience. But in some ways
yeah.
today, my audience is like worldwide. I got people all over the world who listen to me. So that
Hmm.
100,000 like spread out. And
And,
so,
and
yeah,
you
so like,
know that they really, really like your thing, and that to me is what's most important. It's like I don't have as many people, but like the people who do enjoy my work really enjoy the work, and that's what keeps me going.
yeah, I think that's the core is like any artist is like, are you doing it to be like a musician? Like, are you doing it to be in the top 10, or are you doing it to make something beautiful? Right.
Yes.
So if you're doing it something to being beautiful, that song could be like in the bottom 600. But then,
Hmm.
eventually, like a music magazine might say, well, this is a great piece of work. And
Hmm.
there's tons of examples like the Velvets, like Lou Reed and the Velvets were not really appreciated in their time.
Hmm.
Just like William Blake wasn't appreciated in his time. There's many bands that suddenly people go back and rediscover them and say, wow, they were great, you know. And some people believed in what they were doing, and then somehow the audience finds them, you know. And there's lots of examples of writers and poets and musicians that they weren't big in their time, but because they
Yeah.
believed in that work, they gets in the canon anyway. So sometimes it's not like going to happen all in the time that you wanted it to happen, but you believed in it and you just did the work.
My favorite, like, as far as like musical artist story, is the classic is Mozart. Mozart. I love his story because same thing. He was doing like a lot of what would have been like the commercial sound at the time in classical music,
Mm-hmm.
and he just got extremely bored with it, and so he experimented, and everybody was saying to him like, "This is." nobody's going to listen to this. They actually consider his pieces to sound ugly.
Yeah, I read that too.
And it's because he liked to, like, most of the pieces were like more about making you feel good. And his sounds, he liked to explore like anxiety. He was very attracted to that emotion. And so he liked to create like this tension in his music where it kind of went up into like almost like a frantic state. So it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
yeah, it was like a journey of
chaos.
like anxiety. And people were like, nobody wants to sit and experience anxiety. But what I've learned as an artist is it's like, no, actually, people do want to experience, they do want to read those dark themes. They're drawn to it
Well, you see,
because,
yeah, I totally get it. Because like method actors like Al Pacino, like Dog Day Afternoon, that kind of frantic kind of, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he was like this very frantic thief, and he was just like very chaotic in his performance, and it's like it's not pretty, but it was real, you know. And
mm-hmm,
you get that kind of method acting with, you get the great method actors, you know, Harvey Keitel, you get these guys that would just like bare themselves, and it's raw, and sometimes unwatchable, or it's like it's actually hitting a nerve and it's not comfortable. But that's
yeah,
where the director wants you to go. They
yeah,
want you to be uncomfortable. They want you to kind of like, oh, I don't want it to be like, you know, Oklahoma. It's not going to be pretty, you know. It's going to
yeah.
be something that's more substantial. And some people either are drawn to that, or they like, oh, I don't like that, you know. But make them think too much about things they don't want.
Yeah, it depends on how much they've repressed those same feelings in themselves. That's what's happening. It's that they are relating to it unconsciously, and it makes them extremely uncomfortable because they're kind of denying it in themselves. And this is kind of forcing them to feel and confront the monster within. And it's not a fun or pleasant experience, but it's
Yeah,
human.
yeah. I think the human part of it, like a lot of people, like even in this time of COVID, I've talked to a bunch of artists that are kind of getting very serious with
Mm-hmm.
what they want to do. And then other
Mm-hmm.
artists are like, well, I'm doing the opposite. I'm making very light, because they want to project a better place that's more, you know, not as dark, right? So they're trying to project that. And I've seen artists go either way. They, okay, I'm going to use this to get real serious. I'm going to use this to actually create something like a soul song that has a lot of groove, like a funk song.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do a funk song and it's a really dark time, but you could put all your frustration and angst into that funk and do
Mm-hmm.
like a James Brown, you know, like heavy funk groove or a Parliament funkadelic groove. And in itself, that's a lot of art to do that. And then you're like, well, I'm going to try to make people happy with that groove. And
Yeah, that's
I
true.
so I can get that. And I've seen people kind of translate it in different ways, you know. As musicians, you can kind of go
Yeah.
in different ways to do it.
Hmm. I'm all about pulling people down into the depths. So that's where I take them.
Well, you can get into kind of like a fusion thing with Coltrane, where you got into like discordant notes, where you hear like some jazz. If you're getting like free jazz and fusion jazz, they get into these like discordant like things, solos. They're like the notes are not in a melodic way. They're kind of jarring. They're kind of
Yeah.
chaotic. And if you get into free jazz, it's like there's a lot of stuff going on that's not. It's not melodic. It's actually like anti-melodic. It's being done in
Mm-hmm.
a frenzy, or it's done in off
Yeah.
keys on purpose, and
Yeah,
it
that's my
has the same
favorite.
effect as what you're saying, and it's brilliant in some ways when you're able to do that and convey that, and then kind of pull into a full piece of music and control the chaos. You know,
Yeah.
if you can control that chaos and make it work, then
Mm-hmm.
that becomes a brilliant piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you think like that's what the artist is as a medium, is that, you are pulling this expression from the universe, which is quite a chaotic place, and that's what you're doing. You're like taking this chaotic idea and you're channeling it through. and like placing it out into reality in a very like articulate way, which is, I mean, to me, like that's when you know when you've really got an artist, is that when they're able to articulate the chaos. Because
Yeah,
there's a
well,
lot of people
yeah.
who don't know what's going on in their minds and certainly can't articulate things that are going on in their heads, you know?
Well, that's where you kind of get the. I've always been into the stream of consciousness. Like I would say, like 80% of my lyrics, I would just go into my studio and just stream of consciousness something over. I'd just sit at the piano, do chord structures, and just have the open mic, and then let whatever comes out. And I go back and I listen to it, and then I work on it, and
Hmm.
and I kind of, and I found there's a lot of artists that do that because it's like if you sit a lot of times if you sit and try to plan a song out, even like I would say, in my case, the way I write is like one out of 10 of those is actually going to turn into anything. Most of my stuff is
Hmm.
created from like jam sessions, and and
Hmm.
and and going back and just like perfecting that chaos. You're like going and doing something live on purpose and recording it and then refining it, because if you go live, then you have to kind of like deal with it. Like you
Yeah.
can't go back and fix it. And so being a musician, if you force yourself to get into live situations, you get better. You learn how to handle that instead of having to go back and replay it, do it again. You just learn how to kind of bounce off of your mistakes.
Interesting.
It gives you a different way of doing it. I've found over years, when I was younger, I would sit and try to compose, and I did it. And then I said, well, I like more a free way of doing it. And I found
Hmm.
the kind of free form way of doing it and has a better result. It feels more honest.
Yeah. And it will come through, like the audience will feel that honesty and that freeness, because you can tell when lyrics are coming from the heart.
Yeah, I can feel that with what you're saying, because you seem to write in that same manner as a poet. You let it
Yeah.
come to you, and that I think that's I used to live in Northampton, Mass, and there were all these like poetry jam clubs where you could just go. And before I became a musician, I used to go and just do free form poetry,
Oh, nice.
and just I actually published some work, but when I was in my 20s. But yeah, I would just go to this fire and water cafe and just read off this kind of it was a pro poetry slam, and this was like in the 90s, and we just go and all these art kids from like Hampshire College and Smith and Amherst and all these colleges were all hanging out in there, and they were all there, reading Emily Dickinson and reading Thoreau and Tennyson, and coming in there and
Mm.
trying to freeform it, or reading the Harlem Renaissance and getting into other things. And yeah, it was just kind of cool to be with people who were in that kind of space.
Yeah.
Do you do, like, before COVID, were you doing like live poetry sessions?
I have not been doing a whole lot of those, and I can't wait for the COVID to get over with so we can get back to normal and just be able to start diving into, because it's like you said with the COVID thing, when all the lockdown stuff happened, I'm like one of those artists that was like, that's it, I'm going all in on my talent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't wait for the world to switch back on so I can dive in there and get on the stage and just start belting out these words.
So where would you do that once it opens up? Where would your do you have like an artist community where you could do that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different venues in Toronto. We have a really popular bar called Poetry Jazz where a lot of artists will go, and it's, I think I'll give that a shot. Audiences freak me out a little bit. I do have Asperger's, and
Yeah.
I find like the crowds, it really makes me freeze up. And there's that one issue with Asperger's where you can lose your train of thought.
Oh, yeah.
And so whenever you feel like too much anxiety, it is like your brain just shuts down and that's it. Like
So would the
there's nothing.
online like using Instagram or using online media, would that work better for you?
Yeah, I think so.
Because you could control it more.
Yeah, because it's kind of like more you're with by yourself, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's just you and that relationship you have with the camera.
But you could actually get, thousands of people, seeing you, but you don't feel that weight like when you're an audience, we have an audience. The audience is there, but you don't feel the weight. Like a musician, like if I play a live show, which I do from my studio, I don't get that interaction that, musicians, we kind of feed off the crowd. So like if I
Yeah.
play a show in New York, there's a feel that you get like in Manhattan or in the Bronx from that crowd, and it actually contributes to how you play. And if you're just totally by yourself in your studio, you don't have that feedback. And we kind of live off of that feedback to do some of our performances. It's a different thing when you don't have that feedback. You have to kind of pull it from yourself.
Yeah.
And it's, some musicians have a harder time doing like a solo performance from their home because they really need that crowd. And then other musicians are like, I don't really need the crowd. I have all this stuff inside. I can still do it. And
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
feel like it seems like you could do
Solitude
it.
is really great for me. The audience will be great. It will be very intense for me because I have to get myself into a very interesting place in order to bring the art forward. And so I have to be very, very brave, basically,
Yeah.
because as far as I'm concerned, I'm just standing up there naked, with my soul just completely raw.
So I
So I
think,
think
yeah.
the thing with the artists too is, and the artists that really go deep, you have to be very brave. You have to be very comfortable with yourself and brave to allow yourself to go to
Place, yeah.
sometimes the edge, you know?
Well, that's where some artists, they put up like masks. There's some artists that they create stagecraft where they kind of create this other version of themselves. And I've seen
Mhm.
it. Like I've seen artists that are like, if you talk to them off stage, they're nothing like their stage person. Like
Oh,
when they get on
interesting.
stage, they become this other person. And a good example
Mhm.
with like Prince. Prince could jump on stage and be this very dynamic, extroverted, totally, wow, he's real confident. But he actually tried to talk to him.
Mm.
You could hardly. He's super shy, very reserved. You could get hardly anything out of him. But on stage, he didn't seem like that.
Mm.
And it's in Bowie created all these characters that were like not really him, but it allowed him
Mm.
to treat it like he was being an actor. And a lot of musicians have
Interesting.
learned into this kind of thing where they create this other version of themselves that can be kind of hypersexual or hyper this, and and it's not, it might not really be them, but it makes them feel more comfortable because they're putting it on like a show. It's like they're being a method actor and they're getting into that character, and they're able to kind of make that work because they feel like it's like a different part of themselves.
Interesting technique.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing other artists. It's, well, I'm just going to play it straight, like the Allman Brothers. I'm just going to go on stage and that's me. That's who I am. And that's cool. I mean, so it depends on like where you are. Is there some artists that kind of take that theatric capability and create masks for themselves, and other artists that say, well, I just want to go up there and be like an acoustic musician on a guitar, and that's me. I'm a singer songwriter, and that's me. And I'm just going to be comfortable with that, like a
We're
James
we're
Taylor.
a peculiar bunch, artist.
Yeah,
Peculiar.
no one right way. It's kind of the right way for you.
Hmm.
Like when you figure that rhythm when you start doing shows. I did my first show in New York like 4 years ago, and I didn't know how the audience was going to deal with what I do because I play female characters with like vocoders, and I'm a guy,
Interesting.
right? And I went to this club with like very heavily hip hop crowd, and I didn't know how they were going to take a female voice coming from me on stage. And I was like, I didn't know if they were going to be like get violent or get, you never know, because some clouds are
Yeah.
like, they don't like that. And but the interesting thing was, a lot of the guys that were in there that were all 6-pack abs and all muscled up, they came back to me and they said, well, I really like the stuff you're doing. Can you work as my producer? So they had a mask, and their
Yeah.
kind of machismo thing was kind of a
Yeah.
mask.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it makes sense to me, right? Because it's the same thing I was saying where, like, if you think about it, what are like some of the most popular shows on TV? It's like true crime series and like all of this dark stuff. And why is that? It's because we are not able to act out a lot of those things. So we repress it, but we unconsciously are drawn to it in our form of entertainment. And so these macho guys, they are repressing the feminine side of themselves. And so that causes them unconsciously, whether on the surface they would like to or not, to be very drawn to your expression, not even probably knowing truly why. It's because the feminine side of themselves is being drawn to that. You're giving voice to something that they're hiding.
Yeah, I was really surprised that I had so many people. I thought they were going to immediately be, like saying, "Get the heck out of here!" And because I'm very experimental in what I'll do, and it was so cool to feel that
Mm.
all these people were actually into what I was trying to do with the music, and
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
but yeah, it just shows you like the outward representation of a lot of artists is not exactly what it is.
Yeah, because humans, we're all kind of like a bunch of hypocrites. It's
Yeah.
like for everything you say you don't like that's exactly what you desire the
Well, if you
most.
protest too much, I'm going to think maybe that's really what you want.
Yes, exactly. Actually, I would say it's a fact, like if somebody's making a big deal out of something, that's exactly the
It's
direction
probably exactly where they want to be. Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, that's been my experience. But so yeah, it's interesting because I just feel, I didn't like my male voice when I was doing my
Mm.
music, and I used all this electronic capability to kind of change it. And I said, well, I'm not just going to use an auto tune. I'm actually going to create a character, and I started creating, characters kind of like I got into what David Bowie's like Ziggy Stardust and Prince's Camille were kind of inspiration. There, I was like, oh wow, and even like George Clinton had like Sir Nose. There were a bunch of artists I was like used like electronic vocoder or vocal synthesizers to create characters. And I said, well,
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea because then I can kind of dive into things that I would normally not do and have a different perspective in what I was doing, kind of tap into my feminine side. My poetry had been going that way. And I said, well, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? I'm going to create Josephine Electric. And she is the feminine part of me. And
Mm-hmm.
she represents like what I feel in that way. And
Yes.
so that's what I've been doing. And it got bigger than I thought it would get.
Absolutely it did. I'm a lot of my poetry, apart from it coming from something higher than myself, it's filtered through my own personal interests. So I'm super into philosophy, super into psychology. And so a lot of the things that I write are, of course, all these things have influences, and there's a lot of depth. Like some of the reasons why my poetry is so dark is because I have become very schooled in depth psychology, which is pioneered by Carl Jung. And
Mhm.
Carl Jung says that within each of us, we have the anima and the animus. So, I have a repressed masculine unconscious, and you have the repressed feminine unconscious called the anima.
Mhm.
And it's his belief. And then we have another side, like our shadow side. When you are able to integrate and find balance between and a harmony between the feminine and masculine side of yourselves, anything you express through that mirror side, that opposite, is going to be incredibly powerful. So, like, whenever, if I'm writing my poetry or doing my readings and channeling that masculine side in me, that's going to come through very powerful. And for you, it would be like when you're channeling your anima. It's actually, I'm glad that you're doing it because it tells me that you have reached a nice balance within yourself. Like it seems like you could have reached a relatively healthy state.
Yeah, I kind of found it like 6 years ago, and like I said, I was writing poetry that was expressing it, and then I actually found I was playing with this vocal synthesizer from Roland, and I had never really done vocals. I had always
Mm-hmm.
been just a guy playing boards, playing keyboards in bands and not being the lead singer. And I had all these ideas, and I didn't know how to do it. And I said, well, maybe, I was just playing with the synthesizer, and I found this Josephine voice, which was me, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I can use that to match what I was doing with my writing. And then I just had this epiphany, and suddenly all this started coming out like
Mm-hmm.
it's this free form. And I was like, wow, it's like, I kind of like a method actor. I get into her character,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
just comes out. I mean, some of these songs just write themselves, and I just didn't.
Yep.
It just happens. It's weird, but I tapped into it. And I said, well, I'm not gonna get scared of it and just
No,
let it go. And just let it be
it's
what it was.
no, I'm actually going to say congratulations that you not only tapped into the anima and are giving her expression. See, and for me, it's the other way around because I am the feminine. And
Yeah.
so my issue was kind of like I had the creativity coming in from that feminine side, but I would kind of get lost and drowned in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discovered the animus, the masculine side, that really kind of balanced me out and gives me that kind of stability and kind of infuses me with the ability to take that swirling kind of chaotic energy and be able to channel it in a solid and strong way. And it's only been quite recently that I
Yeah.
have started to
Tapped
tap
into it.
into the masculine.
That's
So,
cool.
and I noticed like as soon as I did, my poetry has taken a turn for the better. It's become more powerful as those two sides of me fuse, right?
Yeah, I think it's like when I found Josephine, my work got better.
Yeah.
The songs I wrote pre Josephine don't match what I do with the Joseph voice. And the performance of my music is not what it was. When I increased like exponentially my fan base, you wouldn't think that would happen, but it's like it did, and it's like I tapped into something, like you say, and it's like it just got stronger. My playing got stronger. I got more focused. I got happier about what I was doing, and I think
Yeah.
I found what I wanted to do. I found musically where I wanted to go, and I think
Yeah. I'm
yeah,
just I'm just kind of like getting into that and I can feel like something starting to take off at this point. But it just came to the point where it's like with the whole gender roles, and it's like I'm supposed to be really feminine, I'm supposed to be really masculine. But it's like even though I'm feminine, I just got to a point like I couldn't deny that there is a very strong masculine side of myself that would end up getting triggered a lot in certain situations where I would become like, oh, it would overcompensate
mm,
when the other side of me was feeling quite vulnerable. And so I've only now kind of opened the door and kind of let this force in. And it's funny that you named yours Josephine, because for whatever reason, I decided I would call um, my masculine side Jack because this side of myself, he's very like kind of douchey, like super macho guy, like. And I thought like Jack's a good name for a dude like that.
yeah. I've kind of gone into this idea that that my Josephine's alpha dominant. She is like a type A personality, but then she has vulnerability, but then she kind of
Mm-hmm.
hides it and being having this bravado. and she's very strong.
Mm.
And you can kind of imagine her being a dominatrix and like whipping a CEO,
Oh,
and then like having him lick her boot, you know. But it's like, but the idea that then sometimes she might actually be a little vulnerable, but not appear to be vulnerable. And I've kind of did this idea where I have her kind of cross that kind of feeling that anybody feels like they're assertive, or maybe they don't feel assertive if they get into a situation with a person that triggers them in a way. So if they get to a person that triggers
mm-hmm.
that their kind of weakness, or where they don't feel confident, then you kind of explore that. So you can kind of explore between being confident and not being confident, being assertive and not being assertive, being like the person that's been kind of under the boot, or person that's putting the boot on somebody. And and I try to feel that from something will trigger an idea or an image, and I'll work on that. And that's kind of what I've grown with my characters, and people who listen to my music can kind of hear that's where the direction I go. But I also bring politics into it, and I bring other things into it. So I'll actually make statements like a Dylan type of thing, where I like that kind of songcraft. So I'll try to mix this kind of psychosexual thing with political electronic music and progressive jazz and other things, and call it expansive sound. That's kind of where it came from. But
That's cool. Yeah, we have a similar style in a way. It's just that mine is the same. It is kind of sharing that feminine, masculine energy within the art, and then mine kind of brings in all kinds of crazy shit like quantum mechanics. I'm really into, super into psychology. So I
how
will.
did you get into quantum mechanics? What made you get into that?
I've always had a very deep interest in like the nature of reality, and it kind of leads you in that direction because I want to understand what reality was at like the submolecular level, which is the quantum level. And it's just stranger than fiction once you get to that level of
That's really
reality.
interesting, because I'm a big sci-fi, Harlan Ellison, Ray Bradbury, Ben Bova. I mean, I'm a Trekkie, I kind of was into a lot of
I'm a
a lot of
Trekkie
science
too.
fiction stuff was like a big part of like me growing up. Is like in my day job, I'm a techie nerd. I'm an information technology programmer that lets me afford my toys. But but
Oh,
but
nice.
yeah. So it's just it's interesting that you bring that up. You're probably the only person I've heard bring that up in all the interviews I had in the last few years. So that's cool.
Oh, really? That's so funny. Yeah, I have pretty niche interests that are very weird and obsessive at times, but it keeps me busy. I have a lot to read, and the thing is a lot of the theories are quite abstract and hard to understand, so you end up having to read them several times, and then you still don't quite
Mhm.
get it. But I like that intellectual
Well, I think it's
challenge.
good as an artist to get challenged, to get into something that, is not exactly your comfort zone. I think that's how you develop at any art form. If you take on something that you're not fully, an expert at, then you tend to get, you take that, and as a reference point, it becomes part of your kind of your toolkit as an artist. If you just stay in the comfort zone, then you might stay in like a form of your art and not progress.
Ugh, you'll die. I'm so glad that we talked about your Josephine because it literally, if I take anything from this conversation, that has been at least the one thing that I had to hear this evening. Because I find too, as a journey with an artist, there are times for me personally where I'm like, I'm legit going crazy, I think. It's like if I tell people that I believe there's like a masculine side in myself and his name is Jack, like there are a lot of people who wouldn't understand that and think
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you're quite
yeah.
odd or
Well, I
possibly
ran into that.
schizophrenic or something, you
I had
know?
one point I had worked with a collaboration, and somebody I was working with, they understood I was doing Josephine, but they thought it was kind of it was like a trick. They thought it was just like me trying to do some kind of like what do you call it, like just a gimmick. And when they actually got to know me more and they realized it wasn't a gimmick, they kind of got fearful. And they felt uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's interesting, like even not even as an artist, just like in my personal relationships, especially with men, I find that they they it's almost as if they have an attitude that they'll take the feminine side and they really want to discard the more edgier masculine side of me. But the beautiful thing about it now is that now that I'm learning how to integrate those two sides, I'm able to give the masculine side life and voice through my art, and this entity is not feeling like it needs to go somewhere else for the time being. And I think it comes through in the sense that people, the way that my feminine masculine comes through is really black and white, honestly. Either I am, I'm a very raw and vulnerable person. But at the same time, I will tear you apart if you give me a reason to. And I think a lot of people I've had a lot of people say, oh, you just have a tough front. That's not really you. It's just something you're doing to protect, deep inside you are vulnerable. And I'm thinking maybe that's true. And then I realized, no, I'm both.
Yeah, it's hard for people to handle when you're both. Because people want you to be like one way or the other. And I think everybody's a shade of gray or shades of white and black, and in between. And I think it kind of goes moment to moment. And it's hard for some people. They want people to be, blue is for boys and pink is for girls, and they want it to be rigid, and they don't understand. Yeah. And it was weird because, like I said, I'm in my 50s, right? And I was very drawn to when Prince created Camille and had this kind of androgynous thing going on, and I just I understood it, and I didn't understand why I understood it. A lot of my guy friends were like, "Oh, why is he doing that stuff? It's like it's too like too much for them. They couldn't handle it, right?" They're like, "Why is he doing that? Why does he? Well, because that's what he's feeling." And I kind of recognized it in myself, that kind of androgynous thing, that was actually more than just androgyny. It was actually this other part of me. And it's just like some people just can't handle it, but
yeah, that's what I've been experiencing. So I'm glad that my art, once again, like always, is compensating for what I am unable to establish in my real working relations with people, accepting me as a whole being, which is accepting every side
everybody's
of me.
art, as a creative person, your art shows like a window into your soul. And as more people see who you are, you tend to find people who have like ideas, or so then
That's
you get
true.
your community. I've been able to find a community of like artists that understand where I'm coming from. And it's really more the art community that understands me than the financial community or the business community. Like I have to have a mask for that, because they can't handle what I'm doing in my creative world, right? But so it's kind of like, you kind of know where you need to be. It would be cool if you could be that everywhere. But where I have to work with certain folks, I can't do it because they have certain political agendas. But and they don't make it comfortable, so you have to kind of work within that construct. But yeah, I would rather just be in my creative zone with my creative friends. But in order to survive, I have to do kind of both. And that's kind of the world you have to be in, where it's not exactly what you want it to be, but as an artist, I think you try to build your world as an artist. You try to build that universe where then suddenly you get acceptance, and you get that fan base, and you get the people who understand you, and you know, in the best of all worlds, you can just do that 100% of the time. And that's where I think we all try to go. But you know, the world doesn't let us all do that.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah, I think that when
heaven,
you
I
get to
think,
that point where
to
you
just to
actually
be
can
able to.
execute your ideas and actually live comfortably and feel like that's where, yeah,
Oh
that's
my
like
God, that would
my
be heaven.
ultimate goal is one way or the other, like, you know, build a studio and get like-minded artists to record in a fashion where I can just work with the creative people all the time, or you know, do this podcast where it gets
Hmm.
bigger, and it's been getting bigger from where I started, and you know, we're at like 30,000 listeners worldwide from 3 years ago at like 3,000. So you know, you build what you can build, and you bring a
Nice.
community in, and you see where you
Yeah,
can get, you know.
it's really nice talking to somebody who is further along on the journey than you as an artist, because it's very, for me anyway, it's been a very chaotic, scary, fulfilling, so many things that it's felt in my journey. And sometimes, well, you are kind of walking blind and just walking in faith, and and I trust as long as it's coming from my heart,
Yeah,
it's going to resonate with people. But it's nice to hear somebody who is further along the journey. And again, like
I would
making me
say, yeah,
feel
keep on
like,
doing what you're doing.
okay,
I
I,
believe every creative person
yeah,
needs to, like, don't feel just because you have a bad day, don't stop, you know, because, you know, as a musician, everybody I started with when I was 17 gave up the dream of being a musician. And, you know, maybe one guy that still was
mm,
doing it from the time I was a teenager. And I actually didn't start getting big until I got in my late 40s. So sometimes your time,
mm,
it doesn't come right away. It just, your perseverance and what you believe in gets you where you want to be. And there's a lot of African American artists, like blues guys. A lot of them started when they're in their 40s. They got big when they were in their 40s, like Lead
mm.
Belly and Robert Johnson and some of the really big blues guys. They were like in their 40s and 50s when they got big. So it's not unheard of. It's not just a young person's game. You
Mhm.
can do, if you believe in what you're doing, just keep on doing it.
This has been very helpful. I feel like I can already sense already that I'm going to probably start improving exponentially after having this conversation with you, because now it's like especially with the Jack thing, that literally just I've kind of unleashed within the last week, where I've kind of owned it for myself, and people will start to sense it now as I share more work. But
Mm-hmm.
personally, in my journey, I've really owned it, and within the last week, and kind of said, I don't care if I'm going insane here. Like, I know there's this side of myself, and I'm going to embrace it. And now I don't know. Now I know after talking to you that I'm not going crazy, and so now I can take my next step in full confidence that I'm
Well,
onto something, that I'm
I'm
tapping
glad I
into
helped you
something
with that,
legit
because I
here.
try to, you know, when I sense somebody can understand it, I kind of feel it. So I kind of felt from our conversation that
Hmm.
you would understand it maybe even more than most people I've talked to. So that's really cool. It helps me too, because in some places, like in some conversations, you kind of get the feel, well, I'm not going to go there with this person because they're not really ready. Um, you know, because they're not. You know,
Yeah.
but it's cool. It's cool. It's been an awesome experience. Uh, we're kind of near the end of what we can do, because it goes out to maybe 75 minutes. But we're very, very happy to have you on the
Hmm.
show, and we're going to push this out. Like we said on Instagram, we have an integration with Spotify, so the Spotify version of this podcast will show up as a highlight and a story that people can click right to. Within the next hour, we'll get that up, and it's also
Hmm.
on Apple and Google and Radio Public. Like, there's 11 platforms that automatically get cascaded once this gets published. So that's how we get out to this big audience. But we're thankful that you came on the show, and we'd definitely like to have other people. We interview our artists like multiple times. So if you've got something you want to talk about in the future, and you got a big project or something, like just give us a shout out, and we have people come on multiple times.
Yeah, I would love for you to check back in and see where I am along my journey. This has been a beautiful conversation. I'm very, very grateful that we've made this cosmic link.
I enjoyed it myself. This is why I do this. I found out as a musician that this is like the best way for me to connect to other like-minded creative people during the lockdown. And yeah, I was doing this for the past 2 years, but I've doubled down on it during lockdown. And yeah, it's been really good for me as well. So I appreciate it.
All right.
Okay, well, we'll
Sounds
send you the
great.
links as soon as they're available. And yeah, thank you for being on the show. And we enjoyed our conversation and hope to talk to you again in 2021. This is Fam Electric Ghost, and I think this is a informative message for those of us who are financially challenged and need help making decisions. So all potential home buyers looking for refinance options need a tool to aid them with navigating the financial wilderness of the mortgage industry. Now, Mortgage Calculator Info gives you a no pressure, no sales pressure opportunity to discover mortgage-related finance topics from the comfort of your laptop or your smartphone. So if you go out to https //www.mortgagecalculators.info, and we'll actually have that link available. Again, I'll say it, https //www.mortgagecalculators.info. There are multiple calculators. There's a monthly payment calculator, minimum income requirement calculator, home loan limit, and a DTI to figure out your front end and back end debt to income ratios. That's more complicated once you get into this. Now, even though I own a home, if I'm looking into a tool that I use personally, is the home loan limit calculator that allows me to see what it would take to trade up to a better home. So I think you should check out, www.mortgagecalculators.info, because magazines like Forbes and business channels like CNBC recommend that you take control of your finances. And the first step to get a better understanding of your mortgage knowledge with tools is going to a free site like this to be able to look at it on your own time. And then from there, if you want to go deeper into financial analysis, you could always get an investment advisor. But it's good to kind of get yourself versed on tools like this that don't cost any money, allow you to check out, without any pressure, and do some analysis on your own. So you're doing your homework before you go and make another decision. So it's the first step in that kind of path. So we encourage all of our PEG fans, musicians and artists and creators, we need to be smart about what we do for financing because we need to fund our projects. So being smart about your financial portfolio is a good idea, even though it might not be something that you're primarily interested in. And I think all of our fans could appreciate that as well. So thank you for listening to this little informative statement, and enjoy the rest of the program.